everybody, welcome to Drive Through Review 572. Today we're going to do something a little bit different for this channel. We're going to review Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Now this is the starter box that you can get for the game. So if you've been living under a rock, the Warhammer Age of Sigmar is the sort of redestruction reboot of Warhammer Fantasy Battles 8th edition. Everything's been wiped out, although you can use a lot of your older models if you were playing that. And this is sort of after Chaos has blown everything up and destroyed all the different realms and kicked Age of Sigmar kind of out of existence, so to speak. And then he kind of comes back with his Stormcast Eternals, which are like these undead sort of old heroes that he's reforged and come back to try to retake the realm so that, you know, hopefully everybody can live in peace, all the dwarves and the elves and humans and everybody. And then there's the forces of chaos and death and destruction and all this stuff still in there. So I'm going to kind of do this review as if you've never heard of it, or at least that you've never, you know, you're trying to get into Age of Sigmar. Maybe you're a board gamer or something, because that's mostly who watches this channel. So this is your starter box. You don't have to start the game with this box. You definitely do not. This is a good starter, I've found. It gives you kind of the two armies. It gives you lots of sort of battles and things that you can fight and different ways to make up your army. And it gives you a nice little book to sort of get into painting them and all that kind of good stuff. Now there's other ways to get into it as well, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the main thing that's kind of come out over the last year, came out last summer now, is the general handbook. And so when the game released, it had a huge black eye on it, and a lot of the old Warhammer Fantasy players were pissed off and they didn't like it. And, you know, they destroyed the lore, they destroyed the system. Most of the armies that you could use, you can still use them, but it's definitely a different world and they're not quite the same. They don't really fit in the same. And the other thing was there was no points. So when you go to build your army, there was no real sort of anchor that you could sort of trigger off and say, okay, these are the points that Games Workshop has suggested, you know, and then we can start to play from there. It was just like, hey, play with all the models you own, throw them out on the board, and just kind of, you know, negotiate with your opponent and learn to play that way. And I don't think that necessarily was a bad thing, but we'll talk about that more in a minute. But anyway, they've come out with the General's Handbook, which does a lot to the game. It gives you some sort of structure for some narrative campaigns in play called Path to Glory. It gives you some other kind of multiplayer battles, so you can have, you know, 3, 4, I think up to 6. I'm not sure if it was up to 6. And it definitely goes up to 4 players. And also gives you points for a lot of things. So the old compendium classic armies from the old editions, as well as all the new stuff. And it really kind of grounds the game and gives you kind of a good entry point. So I would say, I'll talk about some other ways that you can get into it in terms of getting the models, but I would say this is a definite must buy. I don't remember what this cost me. I think it was like 25 bucks for this. It's right around there. So it's a nice paperback. It's a good read and everything. And it gives you sort of a nice introduction into like how are the different ways that I can play this game. Now the core rules is this little 4-page thing. Now this here comes in the main starter box, but you can download and print these off. These are 100% free. And they're very simple, but it acts as a nice kind of plug and play core. So you have your movement, your combat and all that stuff. Different ways to set up the battlefield. It gives you kind of a simple way to sort of generate your own scenario to play with. And it gives you some rules for, you know, victory and losing and sort of if somebody brings more models than you. But this is sort of without points in mind. Although you can still, you know, use this core, and this is what drives the core. Now what's going to drive the majority of the game is, let me just sneak over here, is you can also print these out here for free. Let's just see if I can grab one in my stack of notes here. So let's say, just grab this one randomly. So we have here the Auric Runemaster, and this is his War Scroll, and I printed this off from Games Workshop. So you can download these. There are different scrolls there for the different units. Let's see if I can find an actual unit here. So we have here like the Retributors here. So this will have a unit of 5 of these Stormcast Paladins, and it gives you the stats and things, which I'll show you. So that's all free. So as long as you have the models and that you want, you can buy those, and then you have the rules which you can download and the war scrolls that go with the different units that you can also download. So you can go in and you can acquire these models, not necessarily with that starter box like I was saying. They have these start collecting boxes which go about for $80–85 US, and that'll give you like a small sort of starting army in whatever sort of faction that you want, and it's a little bit of a kind of a discount there as if you were to buy them sort of piecemeal. So that's one way to get into it as well. So let's talk a little bit about sort of the lore and the game, and kind of show you a little bit of the rules and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just kind of frankly spoil it. I'm fast in love with this game. It's really, really fun. There's a lot of room for, I think, competitive play, which is developing and it's kind of in process, and they are coming out with a new General's Handbook. I think probably this summer is when it's probably targeted. And so they've been very, very interactive and receptive with the community, and the community has been fantastic. I'll talk at the end of the video about some different places to go, if this is interesting to you at all, to sort of get involved with the community and these different places and things, and just other resources that you can go after. But overall, they've been very, very, like I said, interactive and provided lots of feedback and accepted a lot of feedback, I think, in this process. So I think that's a really good sign in health for the game. And anyway, I'll talk about that more later. So let's just kind of dive in and take a look at like how you might approach this. Because if you're like, it's Warhammer, I don't know, I heard it was awful. It's not awful, it's awesome. And but if I wanted to get into this, how would I get into it? Where do I start? What do I choose? What army do I want to do? And all that kind of stuff. So let's kind of jump into all that. Okay, like I said, there are other ways to get into the game besides the starting box here. Now, one of the things that I picked up, and I think this one might be discontinued or just somewhat out of print. You can see this is King, I don't know how to pronounce this, Vlagorescu's Ghoulish Host. This is a big box here. You can see it comes with 31 miniatures. And they also do these Battle Force boxes here. This is our Iron Jaws. So these are very good deals. If you, maybe, let's say you picked up the starter box for these Flesh Eater courts here, and you wanted to, like, okay, I really like these, I'm going to expand on that. You can hopefully find this box, or in the case of the Iron Jaws, maybe you got the start collecting box, and then you wanted to just, like, I don't want to spend a ton of money, but I can pick these up for, I don't remember what this one cost actually, because I had to search to find that one, but these are about 120, I think, for that. So, start collecting is about 80, 120, and you've got basically a full army for about 200 bucks, or pretty close. It's kind of depend how they divide up these in terms of points. Typically, your standard game will be a 2,000 point game, although I've not played a 2,000 point game. I've only played at 1,000 points, which is a perfectly viable way to learn the game, and you can definitely get close to 1,000 points with some of these. Now, there's one thing I don't have here, and I would just want to mention it because it's probably the best deal in terms of bang for your buck. And that's called Spires of Dawn. It's actually a reprint of an old box called Island of Blood. And it comes with an elf and a Skaven faction. And you have really close to 1,000 points, I believe, with both of those with that box. And they're kind of the old school armies. It's elves and Skaven, so it's not like these sort of superhero / supervillain armies, which is kind of what the new stuff is. That's your best buy, because that's 80 bucks, and you have basically almost 2 full 1,000 point armies right out of that, and it's a really good deal. And I've looked at the models and stuff, and they're really cool, and they come with points for the models, and they come with the battalions and stuff, which I'll talk about. So there's a lot in that box. So that's always sold out, and it's definitely not out of print. It's just always sold out. Now, the way that I got into the game here was through Warhammer Quest Silver Tower. So if you have this, you can start playing this game. You can download the rules. You can download the war scrolls for the different characters. Let me see if I can find a character that was in there. Well, let's just take here the main villain from the Silver Tower here is the Gaunt Summoner. So there's a war scroll now for him, as well as everything in that box. So you can just throw these down and play and learn. And so if you've already got that, you've already got stuff for Age of Sigmar. You can just download the stuff for free and start playing. So there's a lot of different ways to get into it. This is nice because it's got 2 armies, so you and a friend can get it. And like I said, the Spires of Dawn also has the 2 armies. Now, there is 4 grand alliances, 4 sort of main factions in the game. There's death, then there's chaos, and order, and then destruction. So here you can see I'm kind of a nut job, and I have 4 armies, so 1 for each faction. So this is my death stuff. This is mostly the Flesh Eater stuff, which I showed you, the King Vlagorescu's Ghoulish Host. A lot of that is from here. You can see here's sort of the main feature there is this guy here is this Abhorrent Ghoul King on the Terrorgeist. He comes in that box. And Death is probably the least developed and not necessarily least interesting, but it's for me, it's the most frustrating faction to try to build and do interesting armies with. Although, you can certainly do it. The thing is they have a lot of rules and they want to build a big swarm of creatures. So here you come with these ghouls here, and you really want to have like tons of these. So this is really your army for big swarms, and trying to just kind of overwhelm with numbers. These are very, very weak, and they don't last very long, but a lot of these figures in this can regenerate and heal up, and especially with some of the more heroic, I guess you could say, types of guys here, and these are the horrors there. And so a lot of these have like regenerate abilities, and if you have like, say, a necromancer here, he's a good example. He can actually summon some skeletons and zombies and things like that to bring out. And so what you might do is you take points, and then you would actually pay the points when you're building your army for the zombies and the skeletons. Oh, all of these aren't Games Workshop things. Some of these skeletons and zombies are from Reaper, but I had a bunch of extras, so I figured, I can use them. And so a lot of that is summoning, so you can kind of like deep strike. If you think in terms of like a science fiction idea, you move your necromancer out and then summon them, and then that'll maybe capture an objective or something like that. So this is very fun to play, and I like kind of the theme of, especially of the flesh eaters, because they sort of are hallucinating and think that they're sort of royalty, and they actually are the good guys, and they're devouring these evil races and getting them out of the way. And so they've been kind of manipulated by Nagash, who is the head of the Death Alliance, and which I haven't picked up Nagash yet, but I would like to pick up like the main sort of character for each of these. But this is interesting to play, but it's also weird to build because you just need a lot of stuff. And because there's like, if you have 20 ghouls, then you get a little bit of a bonus, but it only gives you 20, but you might want to use one of these special ghouls as a leader and stuff like that. So this is the ghoulish courtier, and so he's sort of he's the kind of special guy there. So it's just a little bit interesting to build, and there's not really, outside of, in my opinion anyway, of the Flesh Eater faction, it's not really that interesting. The other death factions aren't really that cool. But moving on, the next we have Chaos, and I have the most Chaos because I've got a lot of the Tzeentch stuff here from the Silver Tower. So they have these Zangars here, and these are the beast men that are sort of been perverted by Tzeentch, and you've also got these little horror guys here. These are the blue horrors, if I can focus on that. Some of these are my early paint jobs. Whoops. I just started to learn to paint last year, and these were like the first guys that I painted, so I just kind of slapped some blue on them and went to town. But these are the Tzeentch guys, are very sort of bird-like and oddly demonic, sort of Cthulhu-esque types of demons. Now, within each of these different factions of death and chaos and so on, there are sub-factions. So we have here now the Khorne guys, and these are Reavers, and these guys come in the starting box here, and these are cannibals, basically. These guys are very, I would say they are borderline destruction. So Tzeentch is very chaotic and just very manipulative, and the Khorne Bloodbound guys, here's one of their sort of monstrous guys. This is a Korgorath here. These guys are very much just brutal, and they are just about sort of fighting and war and all that kind of stuff. And so the interesting thing about these two is the Khorne guys are very much driven by their heroes. And so each of the classes, you'll have like a hero guy who's just, one figure. And then you might, in this case, have these Blood Reavers, for example, and these you'll take in units of at least 10. So here I've got 20 of them, but you'll take these in big units and move these around the board as a unit. But these are really going to be beefed up by typically their heroes that are going to help drive them and give them, extra ways to kind of mitigate your dice rolls and stuff like that. Oh, I should have mentioned, people might have noticed this guy here. This is not a Games Workshop miniature. It's a Shadows of Brimstone miniature. And he looks sort of like some of the demons or the demon princes. And those can take on different forms. They can be Nurgle, or which is another Chaos faction, or Bloodbound or whatever. But he's got kind of a hood, so you don't really know what he is. So I just have been using him as sort of a generic daemon. And he kind of looks like him other than the hood. And he's actually probably a little bit bigger than they normally are. And like this giant guy, this is one of the cool things about this game for me, is so he can kind of play in any faction. So there's rules for a Chaos Giant and then also Destruction Giant. But I've been using him as a Chaos Giant, even though he probably looks more like a Destruction Giant. I don't know. But, you can be sort of forgiving. The community to me has been pretty sort of like, oh yeah, that looks, as long as it looks kind of like by what you say it is, then it's fine. Now, order is interesting. So you have here these Stormcast Eternals, And these are sort of your angelic types of beings here. And that I said earlier, Sigmar has sort of come back to life in a sense and reforged these ancient heroes. You got some of these guys here that, they fly around and stuff. You can see the wings. And they have returned to kind of restore order to the realm. And that's all I really have as far as order goes. There's rumors that they're going to release some like techno dwarven types of things, which sounds really neat. Now they are also kind of driven by different heroes here. Now here we have a Lord Celestin here, and he's going to sort of help out these different units, like I said before, with the the Blood Reavers. So we have these different liberators, which I showed you. So these are going to travel in packs, and you want them to be helped there. So like this Knight Heralder, whatever, however you say that. So he got his trumpet there, and he's going to be able to blow that, so they'll be able to, do extra charges and things like that. This guy's sort of your main character here for the Stormcast, and so he's a Celestin Prime. You can kind of think of him as, he isn't Sigmar, but he's sort of Sigmar's avatar. I just got this one. I haven't played with it yet, but I got this one and another one I'll show you, because I was, as a reward for painting a bunch of other models. But he will sort of live off the board, and somebody just fell. And he will come land in your battle, and the more you kind of keep him off the board, the more powerful he will be. So you kind of hold him back, and then he comes down and like boom, he drops his big, Warhammer, and this is like the Warhammer of all the Warhammers. So it's called Gal Marizner. So he kind of comes down. So this is sort of interesting. I kind of play them as sort of the bad guys, I guess, because, I don't know, they're kind of interesting because they're like this mindless horde that, when they die, they get reforged again, and they kind of lose more and more of the mortality that they had in their previous life and stuff. But that's kind of order there. And here we have some destruction. You saw that Iron Jaws box that I had earlier. That's all basically from that. I did pick up a couple extra of these heroes here. Now this guy's not an Iron Jaw, but he is an Orc. And all of these guys are basically orcs or of some kind. Now there's an interesting thing here. So when you build your army, you have to take what's called a certain amount of battle line. So if you're playing 1,000-point army, 2 of your units have to be battle line. And battle line is typically just your normal troops. So if you look here, we have these orc brutes. And a unit of those is 5, although you could go more. And so this would be one of the battle lines. And so I have 2 groups of 5. So that would be my 2 battle lines. So I've met that requirement. And what that does is that keeps you from just, pumping out a bunch of these. This guy is Gordrak. So he's sort of the avatar of Gork and Mork, or whatever you call it. And so he is like the ultimate leader of the forces of destruction on, in the different mortal realms. So, and he costs, depending on how you build him, he costs like 700 or 500 and some points, or depending on which war scroll you say you're using with him anyway. And so to prevent somebody just like taking 2 of these, which wouldn't necessarily be the smartest thing in the world if you're trying to win, you still will take 2 battle line, or if you're playing up to 2,000 points, you have to take 3 different units of battle line. And so let's say I decided, well, I'm going to combine these. I'm going to make 1 unit of 10. That doesn't count for your 2 battle line. This is only 1 battle line. Now, the interesting thing about that is, especially with this Iron Jaws faction, is these guys are only battle line if you take the Iron Jaws allegiance. So far we've looked at the 4 factions: death, chaos, order, and now destruction. So most of the time, a battle line unit will work for anything. So I could, if I want, here's some new ones I got here, these Judicators. Now these can count as battle line in any order army. So I could have a bunch of dwarves, and then I can take 1 group of 5 of these, and that will satisfy one of my battle line requirements. Now these guys are only battle line if it's an Iron Jaws allegiance. So you can have the main sort of faction, the destruction, order, chaos, and that can be your allegiance, or you can be the more specific allegiance. So in this case, you want these guys here to be the Iron Jaws allegiance, and that's going to unlock for them different special abilities. So if I mixed in, though, this guy, he's just kind of your regular destruction, and he's also, I forget what his sub-faction is, I think it's just Auric. I can't mix him in this army because I won't be able to satisfy the battle line requirement, because these guys are only battle line in an Iron Jaws allegiance, and this guy's not Iron Jaws. It can't be Iron Jaws. And you know that on these war scrolls. So I just grabbed a random one here, and you look at these keywords. So this guy's Order, he's a daemon, he's celestial, he's Seraphon, which is sort of the dinosaur lizard people. And what else is he? Skink, hero, priest, wizard, etc. Skink, star priest. So he's a wizard, for example, which gives him access to spells. And he's Seraphon, which means he can be in a Seraphon allegiance, even though there is no specific allegiance yet for Seraphon. But he can live in an order. Now, you can't ever mix order and chaos. I mean, you could for fun, but based on the sort of rules here. So it's very interesting here to build these. Now, there are other battle line units that don't have that specific allegiance. They just have the destruction allegiance. Like if you had Ogors or some other kind of Oryx, if you had enough of those, you could then take those as battle line. You won't be the specific Ironjawz allegiance, but you will be the general destruction allegiance, and then you can start mixing these Ironjawz. So sometimes it's tricky to build. I talked about death being sort of tricky to build. Destruction can also be a little tricky to build because, I mean, for my money, this is kind of the default destruction army, these Ironjawz, even though there's some other cool ones too. But you know, to mix these and then to play by the rules, you need to have battle lines, so it's hard to mix anything outside of that specific Ironjawz. Kind of the 4 factions here. So you're going to choose one of the factions, you're going to start building your army, and then you're going to choose an allegiance. And so here's the General's Handbook, and like I said, this is a must get. And so when you choose your allegiance back here, let's see, you're going to have, like I said, the Grand Alliances here. And this is going to give you access to allegiance abilities. And you can see here, so here's the allegiance abilities for Order. And you can give command traits to the generals. You're going to pick one general, and they're going to get different command abilities, and that will be on their war scroll. It says if it's the general, then it gets this command ability and so on. There's also the default command ability that all the generals can get, and then you have these other traits here, and then you have these artifacts of order and so on. So if you wanted to do, you know, a chaos army, then you get the same thing here. Now, like I was talking about before with the specific allegiances here, and only recently have these battle tomes started to have these. Here's the Disciples of Tzeentch one, just came out, and this is, I think, probably the best battle tome that you can get. They've really sort of been developing these over the last year or so to be more useful, and they're actually redoing the Stormcast Eternal one here in a month or so. But I would say the second thing that you would need to get, in addition to the models, of course, in the General's Handbook, is I would say these are worth buying, these battle tomes. Now, they release them in hardback, and I think they always come out in paperback after a bit. So these are really cool. These are going to give you some cool art, and they're going to give you some different fluff and kind of give you the background story in terms of where this particular army fits into the universe and so on. It gives you all kinds of the history and all that stuff. Talks about, you know, what the different units mean, you know, what do the Zangars do, why do the Carrick Acolytes, why do they look that way, all that kind of cool stuff. And then they're going to give you here some different rules and things. And one thing that you might do, let me just see this, and this one has some really interesting art too. If we go back here, this is where we get to sort of the meat of the book and why you would want to pick it up. It's going to talk about a lot of the rule-specific stuff for that particular army. So this is allegiance abilities here. So armies with the Tzeentch allegiance have the ability. So instead of taking chaos, you could fill this up with your chaos army with just Tzeentch stuff, and you get the command traits as well as the artifacts here, and that's only specific. So you can't use those if you mix any, you know, Khorne Bloodbound or anything like that in. You got to use the generic ones from here. And like I said, it's similar with the Ironjawz. There's certain Tzeentch units that if you mix anything in there, then you can't take them as battle line. You've got to have some other generic battle line. Now, the other stuff that's in here is, and these guys have some other really cool abilities. I'm not going to get into that because that video it's going to be long anyway. They have special things. They got some cool stuff you can do with dice, and they have like access to way more spells. Now, you also get these battle plans in here, and this is how you set up your army. There's battle plans in the General's Handbook here, in these battle tomes, and some other books that I'll show you. And these are just sometimes thematic, sometimes they're designed to be competitive and used in match point play and so on. So this will give you different ways, and you can, you know, okay, this is how you might set up the scenario, and or maybe this is how you might use it if you don't have the armies that are specifically designed for, because there's a lot of narrative and stuff in here. So this gives you, I think, 2 battle plans. Yep. And then there's the concept here of the Path to Glory campaigns. Now, the Path to Glory was, I think it was sort of like it might have been a download or something like that, because they have the app that you can download stuff for. But it got more fleshed out in General's Handbook. And then now the Tzeentch book here gives you some different things. So this is a way to do sort of a campaign type of setting, and gives you a way to build out your different war bands, so to speak, and then you get different rewards, and as you kind of play through the campaign, you kind of unlock different special abilities and all that kind of stuff. Now I will give you a warning that I have not played with it as designed here, because the balance of the different war bands there is pretty out of whack. However, they are all close to about 1,000 points. So if you just play with the matched points here in the back, I'll just kind of show you. I think they get a little sticky about this, but so these are the points in the back. They just don't want people like, you know, taking screenshots of my video and stuff. You can build up a 1,000-point army and then use that as your warband. And that way, you know, everything is balanced, you know, between Billy and Frankie and, you know, all of their armies. And, you know, we're evenly matched in a match play sense. And then you can just use the rest of the rules in the Path to Glory campaign. And that's a really, 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 I think it's, well, I haven't played more than 1,000 points. So I think that's the coolest way to play it, honestly. So like, I'm still learning this game. So the game is definitely a lifestyle game. And then there's some other stuff here. Okay, so you also have the concept here of these battalions, which I'll get a better shot of one in a minute here. So I just wanted to talk more about the war scrolls here, and you can see here's the Blood Reavers, and these come in the starter box. I've just made photocopies of some of these. So here it shows you your movement and the wounds, and this will have this is a unit of Blood Reavers has 10 or more, and so you'd have 10 of these little suckers in a group. And when you have these guys out on the battlefield, they all have to be within kind of an inch of each other. But the cool thing is, and this is great, I love this so much, is instead of like pushing stuff around on big trays, which does not excite me at all, you can organize these guys as long as they're within an inch. So you could build them like in a big circle, or you could have them in a straight line, or you have them snaking around, or whatever. As long as they have this thing called like unit cohesion is what you're thinking of. And as long as you build them like that and they're all within an inch, then they're okay. So this is going to have 10 or more, so you could do a unit of 20 of these. Again, it still counts as just one unit. So if you're doing the battle line, which these guys are battle line, you need to, you know, come up with another one. So you got wounds. So when this takes a wound, they have only got one wound, so you got to remove a model. And movement is 6. No saving throw. Sometimes you'll have a saving throw once you take damage. And there's bravery. So these guys here are not very brave. They only have a bravery of 5, and that's sort of like they're going to flee possibly if any of their figures were killed in combat. Well, I'll get to more on that in a minute. And you've got here the different weapons. So if they have Reaver blades, it's got a 1-inch range, and so on. Now some of these they're pretty much the same, but they'll have rend and stuff. So it gives you the stats there, which I'll talk about. And then you have some of the different special abilities and stuff that they have. So that's the Blood Reavers, and then you've now got the Korgorath here, which is just a single figure in this case. You know, you can have as many as you want, but you got to pay points for each one of them, obviously. Typically, you just have one because it only comes in the starter box, unless you somehow hunt more down. I have seen people online that have like, you know, 6 of them. So this guy will cost you a certain amount of points. He's got the wounds. He's got 8 wounds. And he's got a save and stuff. And he has these different weapons that he can use as well. Now, when you go to actually make a battalion, this is where it gets interesting. So now we have here a Goreblade Warband. This is what you get in the starter box. This is one of them, and this is another photocopy here. So this one you can see here, you need 1 Mighty Lord of Khorne, this fellow here, Blood Secretaire, and a Blood Stoker. So these 2 guys, these are 2 different heroes there. And then you need the unit of Blood Warriors, which I haven't shown you. And these are a unit of 5 of these guys. This is kind of a more badass Blood Reaver. So there's 5 of those. And then you need the 1 unit of the 10 Blood Reavers here, and then the Korgorath here, which I just showed you. So all of that will make up here this battalion. And when you go to deploy at the start of the game, you can deploy all of these together, and you'll usually want to keep them within a certain distance of each other here. I'm going to confer a special ability to all the units here in that battalion. Now when you're building this, if you've got those armies, you're going to have to pay points for each of the different units, and then these will have usually points defined. Now some of the start collecting boxes and everything, they don't have points for those yet. I really wish they would do that, because when you get a start collecting box, you'll get like a certain amount of figures, and you'll have the war scrolls for that. And then you also get a battalion, which will give all of that group, that whole start collecting box, a cool special ability. And I think most of those don't have points for them. So, you know, there's no reason you couldn't just play with it and say, okay, we each get to use this, no big deal. It's not that big a deal, honestly. But it'd be cool if they added points for that, so everybody can say, oh, I've got a competitive army here, and I've got 400 points worth of stuff, and this special battalion cost me an extra 40 points. Kind of the very long-winded, what are you going to think about when you make up your army, considering the factions, the different scrolls and things, and all the different stuff that you can do. Now, there's a couple other things I just want to mention quickly. There is a series of books in addition to the battle tomes that I showed you earlier, and these are kind of like the narrative story, and this is sort of the intro one. These you don't necessarily, I think, have to get at all. I got this one for fun. This was a nice sort of setup. It gives you a good sense of how the different factions kind of sit in the world, and it gives you some other stuff here. So here's the Realm Gate Wars begin, and it gives you a narrative to kind of go through, and it'll give you different battle plans. And it'll give you these other things called times of war. So you see he's got a map here. You can sort of create these campaigns out of all this stuff. And it gives you ways to sort of play these, with different factions and stuff. And here's a time of war. So this is sort of another war scroll in a way. So it's adding rules to anything. You can just say, okay, we're playing this battle plan, this fight, but it's in this peninsula, so you're going to have these abilities, and it's going to activate that. And a lot of these are targeted towards different factions. So that's another way you can just sort of add to your experience. And that's really what I kind of want to just end this part with, is the takeaways. There's a lot of plug and play here, and there's a lot of ways that you can sort of we can add rules. I've never played with the Time of War or any of these artifacts or anything that I've showed you. I've just been playing with the basic armies, 1,000 points, and doing that, and just kind of learning it that way. But as we start to learn the game more, then it's, you can start to add more and more complexity and more interesting narrative and all that kind of stuff. Now, when you go to set up your table, you want some terrain. The game doesn't really require a ton of terrain, so you can just get some pieces and lay them out. Sometimes you want a lot of terrain, sometimes you really don't want very much. Now, there are war scrolls for different terrain, so you can see here, I've got this Realm Gate fella here, and usually when you play with these, you want 2 of them. Oh, look, he stayed on there. And so there's like a war scroll for this, and these have some different interesting abilities and stuff like that. So you can get those war scrolls off the internet for free. And this is not an official one. This is handmade, but they do make their own terrain as well. And so, or you can say you can get some dice here, and this is the dice that comes with the game, but you're going to want a lot more than that. And you can roll a d6 for each of these pieces of terrain, or however you really want to do it. You kind of agree, you set up the terrain, and maybe say, okay, we'll have half of the terrain will be this mystical terrain, and we'll roll that. Now you can get these cool dice. I just wanted to show these here. This is from scenerydice.co.uk, and this is just a d6, but instead of the number there, and then you have to look up on the table what the number means, which you would memorize after a while, you can just roll these, and then it'd be like, okay, that one was inspiring or deadly or whatever. So these actually are pretty handy. Set these up, or set up the terrain according to the battle plan. Then you're going to go into deploying units. One player will deploy a unit or a whole battalion, and then you go back and forth. And the best way to play the game, frankly, is with a battle plan that has some kind of objective to it. When you play just kind of the slog, like, kill more models than your opponent, that's probably the least satisfying way to play the game, and I think one of the problems with how it was released. But once you start playing with objectives, a lot of the tactics and stuff really come into play in terms of, maybe you hold an objective and, you get a certain number of points depending on the round number or whatever, or you try to, get all the objectives really quickly and try to get a big victory and that kind of. So it adds a lot of tactics to the game. So you're going to start deploying units, and then you're going to player roll a die. Oh, look at that, we both rolled a 1. And like that, and then this player will decide who goes first for that round. You're going to do that every single round. So it's possible that Billy over there is going to go first a couple of rounds in a row. And there's a lot of debate online as to whether or not that's a good thing. I think I really like this, because it makes you sort of guess that, like, okay, if I get too close to their shooters, then, the ranged attackers, then, I got to be very careful about that, because they might get 2 turns in a row and they're just plinking me with, arrows left and right. and they're just laying waste. So you have to be very cautious, you know, that your opponent doesn't get a double turn, or you can even try to risk it and, you know, try to get into a position, maybe it's an objective out in the open or something like that, and, you know, you can try to bet that you will get a double turn or that your opponent doesn't get a double turn, that kind of thing. So every round you're supposed to roll the die, and then the winner gets to decide who goes first. Then you're going to have the hero phase. So heroes are usually these, you know, single units, and sometimes there'll be a wizard, like here's a battle mage here. And these guys, if it has a keyword of wizard, they'll be able to cast spells. Now there's kind of two default spells that you get, Mystic Shield and Arcane Bolt, and then they also have different special abilities. And then if you choose a general, and they will sometimes get a command ability that they can also do in this phase. So you'll do that first, and then you'll do movement, and then the base game here comes with these big sticks, which are kind of useful because they're 18 inches long. You'll have to get a tape measure, something like these little, these are from Litco, and these are cool because these are sort of designed for AOS, and they have a couple of interesting things. So there's a 3-inch kind of limit, which I'll talk about in a minute, and there's a 1-inch side, and then a 1/2-inch side, which is what you want to gauge for melee combat. So it has kind of like a lot of your important measurements on this. You're going to move your unit. Now you can choose to run, let's say this guy has 6-inch movement here, you can choose to run. In that case, you'll do your movement speed and then roll a d6, which is bad there because I rolled a 1, so you can move an extra inch there, like so. But if you run, then you can't charge, which I'll talk about in a second, and you can't shoot. For like moving over stuff is you just kind of, you know, you spend your movement going up. So if you move 6 inches, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then move up it. Flying units like these fellows here can sort of move through terrain, and with the kind of ignoring, you know, that it's there, as long as they land or are able to land in a safe spot like that. Can't move through other figures, and you must end your movement at least 3 inches away from your opponent there. So you can't move within this sort of 3-inch buffer here. You've got to be able to make that charge into, and sort of, you know, it's kind of you think of the tension in the battle line. You get up close and then you try to jump in there, but you might fail it because they might charge back at you, that kind of thing. Like, you know, whoever gets kind of the initiative there in that battle. So you can't end within 3 inches or less. You'll be able to go through and do your shooting phase. And I should clarify this. This is all the same player doing all this stuff, activating hero abilities, moving, and then shooting. So you do any kind of shooting, you measure. There's not really line of sight, although you do get cover from terrain. Sometimes there'll be different war scrolls for different types of terrain that will give you cover. But pretty much if you can see it and it's within range, then you can do it. There's one thing I've seen a lot of people discuss, and I'm not sure what to do. I think I like it how it is because it's simple. But even if you can shoot, like these guys are shooters here, even if they were engaged in combat, then they can still shoot and they can shoot other people engaged in combat. And you know, some of these miniature games, if you're engaged in melee, you can't shoot, but these guys still can. And after the shooting phase, you're going to go into charge. And so let's just set up a little bit of an example. So let's say these guys were about that far apart, and so you're going to pick one of the models here and draw a line to that other model. You're going to roll 2d6. In this case, I've got 9, which is plenty because this is the number of inches that you're going to be able to charge, and there's right about 6 there. So if you can make that, then as long as you can get within, I should say, within 1/2 inch of one of the models there, then you can move everybody else that amount. So we're going to move him up 6, and so on. And then this guy will move up 6 as well. He'll kind of pile in there. If you've done those phases as a player, then you're going to have combat, and then both players will be able to do combat in this case. So starting with me, I'll initiate a group here. I'll say, okay, these guys are going to do combat there. And then you can move up to 3 inches like so, as long as you can get closer to the model, and then you got to be within the range specified on their war scroll to be able to reach the model. You're going to roll dice, you know, based on the war scroll. So let's just take a look here. As we'll take a look at the lightning hammer here. This is a range 1, and they get 2 attacks. So in this case, we've got 3 of these guys, so 2, 4, 6. So we'll roll 6 dice. And they need to roll a 3 to hit, and then so let's just roll that. So we'll roll those there. So 1s and 2s go away. We have the 3s, and then we need to roll a 3 to wound there. And so that 1 goes away, so we've got 2 wounds coming at him. Now sometimes it will have rend. Now these guys don't have a save, so this will be 2 damage per these, so it'd be 2. So that would basically wipe out 4 of these. And so the defender would have to choose, and you can choose the ones in the back there because it's sort of a whole unit. So you can choose those so that there's still somebody in proximity to fight back. But if they had a save, then you would roll for each of these. Let's say they had a 5-up save, but you had a rend -1, so that would reduce your value. So you need a 6-up save, like that. So in this case, we'd fail the save in both places, and then we'd have to remove up to 4 damage there because each of these wounds is 2 damage. And then you could, so I would activate this unit, and then Billy would activate that unit, and they may activate this unit here to fight back, or some other unit on the table, and you go back and forth and back and forth. There's a bunch of plug and play type of abilities here, like these guys have frenzied devolution. If they're within a chaos totem, and then they get 2 attacks instead of 1 attack. And so then they'll make a roll here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, let's say, well, some of them died. So we roll these on a 4+, so that'll go away. And then they wound on a 4+, and so there'll be 2 more wounds there. And then these guys have a save roll. They would roll this, and then they would have, they failed with both the saves. And these attacks do 1 damage. So we would put, in this case, 2 wounds on this guy. Now these guys all die right away, so this guy would get 2 wounds. So you can just have some little marker or something like that. And so once one of the figures in the unit takes damage, you have to keep damaging that unit until it's dead, and then you kind of pass it on. So if we'd taken 4 wounds, all 3 would go to this one, and then the one kind of floating would go to another one, and we would pick that. After combat, everybody's gone back and forth. You're going to go to the battle shock phase, and we're going to look at bravery here. So this is a bravery of 5. And so we lost, how many did we lose? We lost 4 of these. So we're going to roll d6, add that to 4, so that would be 7. And so for every number over that, so 7 or 5, so we'd have to lose 2 more. 2 more would run away in fear, although there are lots of different abilities that you can get. One of the command abilities, for example, is like you don't have to take battle shock tests and that kind of stuff. So these sort of weaker units where you have a lot of them are usually less brave, and then some of these guys here are a little bit more brave when we do pretty much the turn. And then the next player will go and they'll do, their command abilities, the hero abilities, the spells, movement, charging, all that stuff, and then initiate combat there. Once you're locked into combat here, you can retreat if you want, but you can't do a normal move. You have to move away. Pretty much the game. Most of the time you're just trying to sort of lock down objectives, or sometimes there's other different, more flavorful, objectives in the battle plan itself. Okay, so I know that was long, but I really wanted to just kind of do the kind of the deep dive and kind of, not necessarily a deep dive, but sort of a broad dive, and cover kind of all the different aspects of the game, go over the rules and stuff for folks that hadn't really looked at it as well. Like I said at the beginning, have been enjoying this game, really surprised how much I've enjoyed it. And I think the key for me here is, I guess, plug and play is really the aspect. And I know I've used that phrase a few times. You've got so many different ways that you can get into this game, and it's almost like deviously crafted in a sense, because you've got all the different ways you can start playing a game. You get to start collecting, you get the starter box or whatever. You can play with very, very small forces on a very small battlefield. Typically you just want a 4x4 battlefield, but even with, like, let's say you had the Silver Tower stuff and you just wanted to throw down some units and play, like maybe a little bit more of the armies with the Gobbies and the Zanger guys versus the, a couple of the heroes and stuff. You can just do that and just have fun and download and play the rules and all that stuff, and play like in a little 3x3 battlefield with, 2 pieces of terrain, and just have fun with that. And then you can work your way up to the 4x4 1,000-point thing, and that's a really legitimate way to kind of play the game. I haven't played larger than that. I've been spending too much time making a new 1,000-point army to play with, and haven't really gone beyond that. I think a lot of these factions really want that 2,000 points, though, especially like the death armies, because you want a ton of models. You want a big battlefield. Once you go over 1,000 points, you get to 2,000 and 2,500, and then it gets nutty after that. But you want like a 6x4, normal war table size battlefield. And a lot of these armies, it feels to me like they don't really get to do a lot, because you need kind of those extra points to add more and more swarms and add those heroes and monsters and stuff that will give you benefits and stuff to having that many. So you want some of those bigger ones. I will say I think the Stormcasts are really fun at 1,000. The destruction stuff is really fun at 1,000, and the chaos stuff is pretty fun at 1,000 as well. Although some of the chaos stuff is a little bit swarmy in terms of what you need, but their heroes are really, really cool in terms of, like, how they're going to buff everybody up and and some of the different stuff and drive them crazy and, you know, have them charge in. Really cool. So the system as well at its core is ultra simple, ultra simple. All of the complexity comes from adding in, you know, the different war scrolls for the different units, the battalions, which I showed you, the battle plans that are going to add different rules, and you've got these different dice setting up the different terrain. So because the core is so simple, they just start adding in all these different, you know, layers and different things to think about. And, you know, okay, I can get this far, you know, the charge is very risky, so, you know, am I going to be able to get over here? And all the objective based stuff really adds to the game. Like I said earlier, if you just kind of play the thing where, like, I kill more models, or we just play till we wipe each other out, that's kind of fun, you know, for a couple of times. But really, to kind of get those extra juices flowing, you want to play some of these battle plans with the objectives and stuff. And so I think there's six sort of official match play battle plans in that General's Handbook. And so those are designed to be played at the different point counts, 1,000, 2,000, and 2,500 or plus. And so you can just sort of scale the battlefield to 4x4 or 6x4 based on how much you have, and then you're good to go. And then from there, you can really start to plug in all this narrative stuff, because the Path to Glory system, which I showed you earlier, is awesome. It's a way to kind of build up a warband over a campaign. You can get special abilities, you can add more units to the warband. All that stuff is really neat. But the warbands as presented in the Path to Glory sections are not balanced. You know, the Stormcast one, like, it's just, you can just go mangle any of the Death ones, probably. You know, you can just crush them. And so, but if you play, you say, okay, throw that stuff out. We can still play with all the cool special abilities and different war scrolls and stuff, but let's just play 1,000 points or 750 points or whatever, 500 points. And so, you know, you're relatively even though I think at the smaller, but you know, warband size, some armies will have a certain advantage. It seems like as you get closer to that magical 2,000 point, or definitely 1,000 points, they start to balance off more. But you can pick up and play that. And like I showed you, the one book that has all the narrative stuff that you can go through. And that kind of leads me to the second point. You know, the plug and play stuff is nice, but the narrative here really is sort of surprising to me, because like, I've been kind of a Warhammer fan, but mostly through the video games. I play a lot of Warhammer Online, which is like World of Warcraft type of game. The Dawn of War stuff, which is a 40K thing, it's totally different. I really have kind of liked that sort of, I don't know, it's sort of the grim dark or darker fantasy, but it's not really. It's a little bit more, I gotta be honest, a little bit more of the adolescent side of it. But it's interesting in terms of, like, okay, well, I'm playing a war game, so it's all going to be about smash. It's not going to really be much subtlety or nuance there. So I think for that, because that's the environment they're trying to set up, it's really a cool thing. But the way that they've converted this lore from the old world, which is what I was, you know, somewhat familiar with from the video games, into this sort of far-reaching, everlasting apocalypse thing is really interesting to me. And somebody I saw online, they mentioned it. So it's sort of like superhero Warhammer, because you have these big heroes that, you know, the like the Exalted Deathbringer and the Mighty Lord of Khorne and all these different guys, and the Gaunthammer. There's really they're superheroes or supervillains in a lot of cases. And you have sort of your peons and your units and stuff. And to me, that's much more interesting. Like, when I see these movement trays and all that stuff, I'm like, ooh, what? That's just too stodgy. It's like, to me, it doesn't feel naturally combat oriented. It's like, none of these guys are just going to sit there and walk in a line like that. And I know that happened in, you know, medieval battles and stuff, but to me, I like the free flowing formations and all that kind of stuff here. And that really kind of lends itself into the narrative and the theme, where you have these just odd situations with this very kind of like fantasy Mad Max type of thing, where things are just horrifying. Like, if you're a normal person, or like a normal dwarf or elf or something like that here, like, you're not happy to be alive in this time period. And this time period has been going on forever. But it's interesting because it's now at a point where, with some of the narrative and stuff, that you start to see a new world kind of developing as Sigmar's come back and kind of taken over some of the different realms. Certain towns are starting to be established, and there's 9 realms here. So they're all like different. There's like the fire realm and all this stuff, and each realm is like its own galaxy or universe or something. They're not clear on that because I think that's on purpose, because it gives you room in the sort of silence, the narrative silence, to go and plug and play and build up your own stuff and create your own campaigns. And you have these sort of far off nooks and crannies of things that are long forgotten areas that you can just kind of, it gives you a space to create your own world and do this stuff. And if anybody's been watching this channel for any period of time, they know that I'm a big fan of Frostgrave, and I mentioned the Frostgrave video. When I play Frostgrave, I set that in this universe, in this Age of Sigmar universe, because I use a lot of these models here as part of the warband, in Frostgrave. And so it's kind of like this, it's this far off, ancient city that's in the realm of ice or whatever the heck. And, there you go. So it gives you that space to build that narrative with your friends and play that out. And it gives you all of these tools. And it gives you now some ways to sort of balance all of this stuff with the points. And a lot of these new battle tomes are very interesting with just the different special abilities that you get. And it has that very sort of like Magic the Gathering kind of vibe where it's like, okay, I've got my core deck, I'm building a red deck or a blue deck or whatever, and now I'm plugging and playing these different units and these different combinations, and this certain combination of units makes this bigger battalion, and then they have like these battalions that are like of all these sub battalions, but I'm like, okay, that's like 5,000 points of stuff or whatever, because you'll have like this Goreblade Warband, which I showed you, and there'll be another battalion that says, okay, take 3 Goreblade Warbands and this other battalion and this other 3 battalions, and you're like, that would like fill up the whole table. But they have that there so you can, I just like that idea of that plug and play part of it. And it still has, and this is one thing that I've always liked about the 40K and the Warhammer lore, is it's very tongue-in-cheek. It doesn't seem to take itself too seriously in terms of the lore. And so I mentioned kind of the adolescence there, but it also has that kind of subtle humor. So maybe there's some nuance, but there's certain zealousness with each of the factions. Like the Flesh Eaters are sort of hallucinating and think they're the saviors of the world. The Khorne are basically mad and they're cannibals and they're jerks. Tzeentch is just, they are like the Thanos of Warhammer, just very manipulative and chaotic, and they're backstabbing the other Chaos factions all the time. You've got your sort of do-gooder, angelic Stormcasts, and then some of the, like the dwarf lore is very weird and interesting, the Fire Slayers, and then maybe there's a new dwarf faction coming out. And then Destruction, of course, that's your typical like, oh, we just like blowing stuff up and we love the fight, and they actually in the lore were teamed with the Order and the Stormcast Eternals because they're like, yeah, this is going to be a good fight. And then they're like, oh, let's fight you now, as they backstabbed them. And even like Nagash, who led the undead, he partners with Sigmar because Chaos is just like ruling everything. And then after a while he's like, you know what, when your Stormcast die and get reforged, that's a soul that I'm expecting, because he kind of lives off the souls of the dead. And then he backstabs Sigmar because basically, he's taking his power source. I don't know why that's funny to me, but this is super funny because Sigmar's like, oh no, I need these people to come in and do good. And then Death is like, no, that's what I live on. You're taking the dead from me. And, it just has this weird, bizarre, sort of funny stuff that is just, it's not really like any other sort of theme. All right. So anyway, I just wanted to review it because I know I don't normally review this kind of thing on this channel, but I have really got a sort of a bug in me, especially with Frostgrave and this now. And it's really fun, and the whole construction part of it, building terrain and painting the models and all that stuff, is really neat. And the last thing I guess I'll leave off with here is the community. The community of this game is fantastic. I do wanted to bring up, I had it here. Now I've shuffled all my papers up here. Let's see if I can find it. It's right here, isn't it? Please be the paper. Yes, it is. Here we go. So I'll put links to these in the description, but I wanted to kind of describe the community and the different resources for this. And I just wanted to also say, Games Workshop to me has turned a corner over the last year or 2 years. wasn't super familiar with their work before, but you see a lot of the bad blood they get online and stuff like that, with terms of shutting down fan files on Board Game Geek and dumb stuff like that. And so hopefully they are sort of course correcting, and it seems like they have, because they've been super engaging with the community in general in all of these places. So let me just go through these though. These are independent communities. Gorilla Miniature Games is a YouTube channel. I've talked about him several times. He does a lot of battle reports. And he does a ton of Age of Sigmar battle reports. If you really want to see the game in action, I might do a battle report. I'm still kind of like nervous of that, but I would go watch his. They're really good. He kind of walks through. You can see the early days when he was doing the battle reports of kind of without the General's Handbook, like how wacky, but also kind of fun those games were in a way. It's very interesting to see that. I think I've kind of done a double take in terms of like how necessary points really are when you can have a nice battle with your opponent. Like we'd started playing with the Silver Tower stuff and it was fine. It was fun. It wasn't like we didn't care about balance. We just played it and the story happened. So, but it's interesting now that, all his battle reports use points and stuff. Doom and Darkness is a little bit different of a battle report. It's a little bit more analytical, where Guerrilla Miniatures is more of like a let's play. You kind of play through it. Doom and Darkness is sort of an after the fact kind of analysis stuff. It's also very good. Two very different tones, but I like them both. Also, Warhammer Weekly, which is Vince Venturella's channel, and he's an excellent painter, by the way. And he does Warhammer Weekly on Wednesdays, and then he'll do like a thing on Fridays where he has a kind of a think piece, a little 8-minute video. The Warhammer Weekly is kind of like a podcast. Him and some other folks in the Warhammer community, they come on, they'll talk about like the latest news and all that kind of good stuff. And Heelin' Hammer is a straight podcast. This one I would really recommend. These guys are great. This is one of the better podcasts in general that I've listened to. Very sort of new player friendly, but they, if you listen to a lot of board game podcasts, they kind of talk about what they've been playing, what they've been painting, the new news, and they'll kind of do a deep dive on the subject. Most of the lore that I was spitting, I know because of that podcast when reading the main book, but they get really into detail and kind of summarize a lot of the lore and stuff. And they're very involved with the community in the UK and make me want to move there, or at least maybe commute or something, so I can play Warhammer with a bunch of people that want to play there. That's a great podcast, Heelin' Hammer. Then there is a written battle report spot called Tabletop Gamer's Diary. Very nice, good pictures, and he's kind of working through this whole narrative of it, which is fantastic. That's really good. The Age of Sigmar fan group on Facebook is fantastic. Very welcoming, open community. Open to questions. People are always sharing stuff that they've painted, new sort of conversions and stuff that they've done. Very, very cool. There's Age of Sigmar Reddit, which is pretty helpful. It's still Reddit. But I would say you can still get useful information off there, and most people are very helpful. Then there's also the Grand Alliance community, which is fantastic. Now, there's a lot of things there that have been developed. There's a lot of sort of like mods and things that have been put together. I'm thinking of especially this one called Hinterlands, which makes a kind of a Mordheim stuff. I haven't played with it, but they work together with a couple different groups, and it looks really, really cool, really solid. Doesn't lose any of the simplicity of Age of Sigmar, but again, it adds that kind of plug and play aspect of it. And that community is really good too. And then there's the Daka forums, which I'll list at the bottom, which is about the same as Reddit. So anyway, that's usually pretty good until somebody from another game comes into a thread and talks bad about it. And then things kind of blow up. Anyway, you know how the internet is. So that's kind of the general sort of broad overview, not necessarily deep overview. And this game is certainly deep because the more that I've played this and the more I kind of try different factions and things, the more I'm seeing like, oh wow, there's a lot of sort of meat here to chew on. Like I talked about the whole like random initiative every round. Like it's frustrating at times, but it's also makes it very exciting at times, and it makes it lead to sort of cool climactic endings where you're like, oh, if I don't know what happens here, if you get this, you're probably gonna win. But you set yourself up for that situation. You don't want to be reliant on getting that turn order, which is interesting, because if it was going back and forth turn order, then it might be a little bit more stagnant. But it's such a simple, weird thing. And it's just, as I've played this more and more, I've started to see a lot of that extra nuance and stuff in terms of the tactics, just all, like I said, all that plug and play stuff and configuring your army and playing with different battle plans and all that stuff. I mean, my favorite battle plan to play, just kind of to leave you sort of anecdotally, is it's called Gift from the Heavens. And you don't really know where the objectives are going to be. You kind of divide the table up, and then you roll a die at the end of the first round, and then the 2 objectives come down, and then you're kind of scrambling to get to the objectives. And so they might come down like on one flank or the other flank, or spread across, and so everybody kind of spreads out, and then you kind of go for it. But you're like, okay, how do I spread out? Do I put my big behemoth over here and kind of let him do his thing, or do I send a little unit with him, all that kind of stuff? And then the mad sort of scramble, and the victory points of that one actually become worth more and more as the rounds go by. Typically you play 5 rounds, but sometimes you can go longer than that. So yeah, definitely take a look at this game. I know it's not for everybody on this channel, but several folks have been asking, when are you going to review it? When are you going to review it? So decided to buckle down and do a review of it. And if you already play the game, you're probably watching this just to get more feedback or whatever. You just want to see more about it. But if you haven't played the game, I would give it a look. Get the starter box, get that Spire of Dawn box. That is going to be your best entry point. Stuff is pointed. There's 2 armies. There's 2 good size armies. If you're not into the whole supervillain stuff, it's kind of elves versus Skaven, the Ratmen. So it's more traditional fantasy. And it's got battalions and things like that all in there and battle plans. And it's definitely the best bang for your buck. And I think if you spent like the $80 for that, and that was all you ever did with the game, you would still get a good set of games out of it. Now, I've not played with it, but just based on everything else that I've done here, I think that's your best bet. Or you can get just the basic starter too, because that gives you a lot of good battalions and all that kind of stuff. Okay, thank you.